truth hurts. The truth hurts.
The truth hurts, and how could I have anyone else who knows me better than my mother and father, who are no longer with us, than my ex-coach, Denis Pagan. Denis, thanks for joining me on my podcast and being the first guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wayne. I'm privileged to be involved, and I hope it goes well for your son.
Mate, what a journey that you and I had. So I want to go back. I don't necessarily want to talk about, holding the cup up together, which was obviously fantastic memories and memories that I'll remember forever. Playing in premierships and finals, which obviously we did a lot of, and in the under-19s, and also obviously at senior level. But I want to take you back to when I was 15, 16, because there's been a few things said that when we first met that I may have made a comment to you about not playing in the under-19s, but basically going straight to the seniors. And I think I was 15, turning 16 at the time. Now, is that actually true or not? Because I don't remember saying it.
Well, the first time I met you, I was at the top of Abbotsford Street and Flemington Road next to the Children's Hospital. I was coaching the under-19s at that stage. We had a team, probably 100 kids down there. And then Greg Miller, who was the football manager at that stage, came to just to watch a few of the young recruits he'd brought to the club, and he had Wayne Carey and Bomber Hamilton with him. Can you remember that?
Yeah, I know. Well, obviously,
anyway,
still good mates with Bomber.
Yeah. Anyway, Greg introduced me to you, and you were a very impressive looking young fella, very confident. And I still remember the words you said. I said, "G'day, son. How you going?" And you said, "Yeah, good, thanks." And I said, "Wayne, you come down to have a run with the under-19s?" And I think your words were somewhere along the lines of, "No, I'm here to play with the seniors." Or maybe train with the seniors. Yeah. And I thought to myself, geez, a confident young man. And a very good relationship started as a result of that confident conversation. I think every sportsman has got to have a strong belief in himself, and I think it was probably one of your greatest assets, and I saw it in full flight that morning.
Well, as it turned out, I obviously didn't play senior footy in that year. I played reserve grade footy. I think later that year after I played Teal Cup, believe it or not, for Victoria. But so once we start playing the games, and what a lot of people wouldn't know is that you were playing me, or I came over as a centre half back. So I was playing centre half back in the under-19s. What were your first thoughts then, once I started playing? Did you think I was going to be any good? What were your impressions?
Well, I knew you were going to be good from the first time I saw your play. We had Eric Lissenden, who was a boom recruit from down Warrigal Road, and he could kick the ball 25 metres longer than you could, Wayne. And
really?
Really. And I thought, oh, gee, we'll have a very good side here. I knew you were going to start the year off with the seniors, and what I meant by that, train with the seniors, not actually play with the seniors. But you started off there, and you came back, and I thought, we'll have a good side here. I think we started you off at centre half back, and you were catching everything in sight, and Eric Lissenden was kicking the bladder out of the ball, but it soon worked out that probably your best spot was centre half forward, and Eric probably wasn't going to cut the mustard eventually, and that's exactly what happened. Well,
I remember a time, I think we were playing at Glenferrie Oval. So that's, for those who don't know, that's Hawthorn's Oval that they played at many, many years ago, and it started raining before the game, and you came up to me and said, "Son, did you bring your screw-in boots?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And you called me an effing imbecile. And I remember thinking, okay, so this is, by the way, I was used to that.
I don't think I swore that much. I probably used that word 3 times a season. That was my limit.
Yeah.
Must have used them all up on you very early in the piece.
I deserved it. So I just had the moulded sole, so I didn't have the screw-in boots. But you called me an imbecile. And anyway, you sent someone back to Arden Street to grab the screw-in boots. I ended up playing all right that day, and we won the game, so all was forgiven. But just in regards to, I guess, that, and like I said, given and my upbringing, and how much of did you know, or how much does and at the time you're only an under-19, well, when I say only, but you're an under-19s coach at the time, how much of our history do you delve into? So do you talk to Greg Miller? or Ron Joseph at the time. Obviously, Ron's just passed away recently. But do you talk to them about what type of kid, what type of upbringing? Do you know our background at all?
Look, we had 120 players come down. Greg had recruited them, and that's all I wanted as coach. And we just had to sort through them. As we went along, I found out things about, kids, their background, their home life, where they came from, what their strengths and focus was, and it sort of narrowed at the end. And when we got down to a squad of about 30, 28 boys, I got to know them pretty well, knew all about them, and hopefully that was used to the advantage of the club.
I always say to people that when I talk about yourself, I say one of the great psychologists as a coach, because what you knew what buttons to push, you certainly did with me. Does the upbringing come into how you speak to a particular player? Like, clearly, if you know someone's come up with a silver spoon, so to speak, and those that probably haven't, you probably have to be softer.
Yeah, look, I always kept my coaching simple, Wayne, and I still remember Alan Jeans saying something. Gee, when even before I started coaching, he said coaching is a bit like a bottle of vinegar in one hand and a jar of honey in the other. Knowing what to dispense and to what amount, probably going to be the makings of a good coach. And the reality is, I might have known a lot about players' backgrounds, but I was only judging them in the present and what they did for the team and on match day. And it just all sort of grew from there. I got to know people. I got to know not only yourself, but all the other boys, what sort of, what made them go, what made them slow, what made them stop. And I think we tried to use that as good as we could. And I think if you complicate it, you're not going to be successful. And everything about coaching, I believe, is keep it simple, and I think you get best results.
One of the great paganisms that I remember, and there's plenty of them, and I know you sit back and you have past players tell you about things that you've said, and you say, "Really, did I say that?" But one of the ones that transferred from under 19s right through to the seniors and reserves and then seniors at Essendon was you'd always pick out a player that was really nice, and he went about his football nice, and you'd say, "I tell you what, son, you're the sort of kid that I'd love to marry my daughter, but I tell you what, you got to go at the footy. Why didn't you ever say that one to me?"
Because I didn't want you to marry my daughter. You were about number 45 in life. I'd like you to come around and visit me, but I didn't want you to marry my daughter.
Yeah, fair enough. I always wondered why that.
Yeah, you've only got to work it out. If I put Wayne Carey there and I put Johnny Blakey next to him, butter wouldn't melt in Johnny Blakey's mouth. He's never been late for training. He's never put lozenges in his throat to try and disguise what he'd been drinking the night before.
So okay. So let's jump a page. So you leave North Melbourne, you go to Essendon, you coach a premiership. You clearly just premierships followed Denis Pagan. You had a game plan, you knew exactly, you had a structure, you had team rules. So the game, you were predictable to one another. We were certainly predictable to one another in the under-19s. We knew what we had to do. There was a discipline around that. You didn't break those rules. If you did, obviously, you certainly found out about it. So clearly highly successful in the under-19s. You took it to Essendon in 92, I think it was, and you win a premiership with Essendon in the reserves. And then you find your way back to North Melbourne. Tell me about how you approached, because I've heard a lot of things, but how you approached that interview when you walked in and you had the North Melbourne board, and there was reports that Dermot Brereton was going to be the senior coach and all sorts of different people. Tell me how you approached it, because I hear that they didn't interview you, but you interviewed them.
It's an interesting scenario. I sort of certainly did a preparation. I wrote a CV, or I suppose it looked like the New Testament. It was about 2 inches thick, everything I knew about football. I look at it now, I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I had everything organised. And, there were three people who was being sprouted as possible coaches of the Kangaroos: Dermot Brereton, Rodney Eade and myself. And in racing parlance, probably Dermot was probably 6-4, Rodney was probably 7-2, and I was probably 25-1. Anyway, I went to the interview, and I always remember what Ron Evans, the late Ron Evans, and I just think he was a great man, a great administrator, a great businessman, a great footballer, cricketer. He one of his business was the Spotless Group, and I was talking to him one day, and we talked about negotiation and how he handled it. And he said every time I came into a room, a lot of other business people there, and we're going to get into discussion and negotiation, he would always, you'd have your chit-chat at the start and everyone would be sit down. And he said, look, you've got to try and control the meeting without being dictatorial or authoritarian. And he said what I always did was I'd always have my presentation in my briefcase next to me. And when everybody sat down, everyone's looking around who should speak first, he would always stand up and say, gentlemen, I'll open the batting. Excuse me. And proceeded to go with his presentation and get everything he possibly could out on the table there, and everyone was sort of nonplussed if you'd done your homework. And it's amazing how it worked, and that's exactly what I did at North Melbourne. I said, gentlemen, would you like me to open the batting? And I just walked them through my presentation. Probably took 90 minutes. I didn't think they really wanted me at the start, but I could see as we went further through that I'd sort of changed a few people. And there was a school of thought that sort of said, I know a few of the North Melbourne directors had said, why would you want an under-19 coach as a senior coach? Have you ever seen an under-19 coach be successful? My answer to that was, well, I've never seen an under-19 coach given the chance, so how would you know? Lucky enough to get the job.
The other thing that you would have known, and everyone knew, that you had coached all of us in the under-19s. So you knew us inside and out. You knew our personalities, as you said before. You knew our backgrounds. You knew what made us tick. Did your game plan and team rules at that time, did you write that up knowing what personnel you had? You obviously had, there was myself being a young centre-half forward. You had Johnny Longmire, you had Anthony Stevens, you had a Glenn Archer coming through. Corey McKernan was obviously still a little bit younger, but just, coming through the ranks who you'd coached in the under-19s. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of all the guys that you'd coached prior to obviously leaving North, going to Essendon and then coming back. So how much does personnel dictate your game plan?
Well, again, it was based on simplicity. And I see a lot of sides doing it now. Look at Collingwood, when they play inside and they take the game on and play fast football, they look sensational. I've watched Geelong change the way they played and won a premiership last year. Tigers based on getting it in quickly, hit on, knock on, good front and square. And I just thought, I watched the teams of Hafey in the 70s with Royce Hart at centre-half forward, and I just thought, the game looks so simple when it's played this way. You look at a lot of young coaches come in now, they feel as if they have to reinvent the game. They try to play some sort of possession brand of football or keepings off football. And the more times you handle the ball in football, the more chance for error, and that's never ever going to change. And, we had goals scored, our efficiency ratings, and, we didn't want to go wide going in the forward line. And sure, you leave yourself open for a rebound every now and then. But, you mentioned the players that we had with yourself and Corey and John Longmire and plenty of young...
Wayne Schwass, Anthony Rock,
Brett Ellis, yes, Anthony Stevens, the guys at the bottom of the pack. If we couldn't get it to our marking target, kick it over the back to space, and blokes would just run onto it. And it really worked well in every level of football that I was involved in, and I saw no reason not to implement it when I was a coach of the Kangaroos, and I think it really worked in '93, and we won a lot of games in a row, and the Kangaroos are probably as exciting as anybody to watch.
How do you come to the decision? And we've never sat down and spoken about any of this ever before in a personal setting, whether it be over a beer or a glass of wine or a coffee or a green tea. How do you come to the decision to say, because Wayne Schimmelbusch got the sack for you to get the job, and my understanding, if Schimmer had stayed on, Wayne Schwass was going to be the captain. How do you come to the decision to name a dingbat like me at the age of 21, knowing that there were, knowing that I wasn't a choir boy, You knew that I trained hard, but how do you come to that decision to say, well, I want you as captain rather than, say, someone maybe a little bit safer?
I'm glad you brought choir boys into the conversation because I don't think you'll ever win a premiership with a team full of choir boys. You need a couple of rascals. You need somebody who's got a leadership presence. And, you know, I've observed you over the journey, and you had that presence. There wasn't too many others that had that sort of presence. Even now, you've got it when you walk into a room. People gravitate towards you, and I've seen it time and time again. And I just knew that. I knew you had rough edges, and I knew you'd muck up and do a few things wrong, but I also know your football ability inside out and your leadership capability. I knew that people would follow you wherever, even to the point of someone would say, let's go and have a bowl of pasta for lunch, and Wayne would say, no, we'll go to Don Camilo's, and we'd go to Don Camilo's. And, you know, Wayne had that presence for the young fellas who perhaps didn't have their $10. Wayne would give them $10 so they could come and have a bowl of pasta and a bottle of Coke and really enjoys things. And it was just I don't think it was an easy, I don't think it was a hard thing to work out. You were a best leader, and I'm nothing against Wayne Swass because I think he's a wonderful player and an outstanding individual. But I just thought you were the best man for the job, and I think it's been proven right by what's actually happened with Kangaroo. And you look at the Kangaroos' history.
Do you remember that phone call? Because remembering back then there were no mobile phones. So for those who don't know, Denis would always call up the team or certain players on a Friday night just to make sure they were home more than anything, and also talk to them about what he wanted them to do the next day. But I remember where I was living, and I remember the phone call. And I remember you called me up and said, I want you to be, you're going to be the captain. Do you remember my answer?
You weren't sure about it, I think, from memory. I don't think it probably hit you between the eyes, and I don't think it was anything that you ever thought about or seen yourself in that position. And I got the impression you were a bit reluctant at the start. Did you
ever think that as we were coming through, and by the way, I think a lot of players have this, and I've heard Glenn Archer speak about he played on fear. Did you ever think that the way I was on the ground was different, obviously, to what I was off the ground? Did you ever think that I wasn't being truly myself in the way I conducted myself, certainly on the ground?
No, I thought you were always natural. I always thought what you see in Wayne is what you get. I don't think it was any facade or anything. You always had a great belief in yourself, and I think if you look at any successful sportsman, inner belief and confidence in your own ability is paramount, and you displayed that every time we went out in the ground.
I think that's and that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you. What if I said that I think I was more insecure than probably most of the team? And when I say insecure, I'd built a wall or built a confidence around that, and I remember the time that I did that. I was 13 years of age when I left home and moved in with my older brother, Dick, who you obviously got to know really well over the period of time. But it was at 13 that I put this facade up and said, no one's ever going to hurt me ever again. And from this point on, and then from that point on, I never got picked on. I never let anyone pick on me. I never let anyone pick on my mates. And it was like this armory that I put up. And definitely when I got to training, and you feel that comfort around, obviously, and the love that I think you gave everyone, for that matter, not just the football players but the staff. And we often miss how good a environment that you created. And I say that you created because you did. You were the leader. We were just young men. So you created that. It's funny that even you wouldn't pick up that, and I'm sure you did at different times, but that insecurity and that, I guess sometimes that little boy in me, I think you would see, and sometimes it would come out in an immature way where I think there was a couple of times where I walked in and said, you can have the captaincy back. And they were just, and that was just me being insecure in how I behaved. And it might have been after I'd been out, Denis. Never during the week, as you know, but I might have been out. I might have gone a bit hard on a weekend. me being insecure then, I'd come in and think, well, I needed your support. Do you remember those occasions?
Look, I can remember one time I knew you'd been out. A lot of times I knew you were out, but look, I judged everybody on how they trained and how they played. You didn't let us down too many times. Look, you talk about insecurities. A lot of players at the club were like that, and I felt that at times, but I didn't want to highlight that. Tried to build confidence within the group, and the blokes who had confidence, I tried to get them to express it at every opportunity. I can remember one day you came in and you told me you'd been drinking, and I said, "Yeah, well, have a drink, son. So you should. You've been playing well." Something along those lines. And you thought I was going to give you a rocket. I did exactly the opposite to what you probably thought, and then you went out and trained well and played well.
That was the other. That's what I mean by being a psychologist. There was also another time where, and this will lead to my next question after this, is there was another time where you called the whole leadership group in, and you knew that we were going reasonably hard off the ground. And as you said, we trained hard. We were winning games. So everything was going well on the ground, but you'd heard, you know what, we're getting up to Sydney and we're going here and we're going there, and you called us all in and you said, you know what, Rocky, Schwatter, Sholey, Longers, Mick, all of you blokes, there's only one guy in here that can continue to do what you're doing off the ground and play well, and the rest of you aren't doing that so well. Do you remember that conversation and why you had it?
Vaguely. But that was true. You could used to drink a fair bit and enjoyed yourself, but there was no one who trained harder. You were always up the front of the group. It was like a penance for you. And when it came to match day, you always performed. Well, if that was your way of doing it, terrific. I had to juggle all that and get everybody into line, and maybe a few of the lesser lights might have got their nose out of joint, but unfortunately, our senior players and our supposed so-called stars were going to win us or lose us the game. And unfortunately, the soldiers were going to be there as backup and ammunition for the superstars.
Now, I remember you told me numerous times, and I went against your advice. You said to me not to ever write a book, and I obviously wrote a book. I was probably in a different state of mind when I actually wrote The Truth Hurts, but there's been a few players since that have written books, and they've made comment about our relationship and how I was treated at the footy club, and I know that you'd know what they said. So was I treated differently to anyone else at the footy club?
Maybe we had some robust discussions. I'm sure I told you one-on-one. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to bring down our leader in front of everybody. And you know as well as I do some of the things I said to you in my office when no one else was around.
Yeah, I do.
And, that was just my way of doing it, whether it was right or whether it was wrong. And a lot of blokes made a joke about it. A lot of blokes said, listen to Dennis, Wayne's got love bites on him from the coach. But look, that was just the way it was, and that was just my style of coaching. If you're performing each week over and above everybody else, maybe you get a little bit of leeway. I had, people say, do you have favourites? Of course you do. I probably had half a dozen favourites. And, at the end of the day, our approach and our style seemed to work okay. That's probably why I did it.
Would it be fair to say, and just to digress off that, the current game, you've got Taron Thomas, obviously not talking about what he's done or what he hasn't done, but obviously making some mistakes off the ground. You've had Jordan DeGoey, who has made a couple of mistakes off the ground. Do talented players get more chances than the not so talented?
Well, you can say what you like. They certainly do, Wayne, because the talented players are going to turn things around. If you ever look at Collingwood's success this year, I reckon if you counted their best and fairest, Jordan DeGoey would be probably 1-2 at the moment, maybe even young Dacos. And unfortunately, that's just the way of the world. Your best players are going to win it or lose it for you.
And was there anything that you said, and we talk about, I'll give you another paganism, and I remember in 96 talk about a conversation that we had halfway through 96. So this is our first premiership as a team since the 70s. And I remember you called me in and you said, you know what, son, you're going to be a wasted talent. You're wasting your talent. You know, you're going to be, I think you said I was going to be another Sam Kekovich. Is there anything that you've ever said to a player that you look back, and I don't expect you to come up with an example, that when you think back now, because I think back now and think of, you know, whether it be behaviour or things I've said or certainly actions and things that I've done, they say you have no regrets. I think that's bullshit, to be honest. For anyone that says they say they have no regrets, clearly you learn from mistakes, because if you don't, you're a nitwit. But do you have regrets about things that you said or the way that you've treated a particular player?
Oh, no doubt about that. I can't think of a particular instance. Maybe Shannon Grant and Corey Jones got a rocket. They were there was a game at Canberra, and they were at the club function on Thursday night, and I blame the club for this. They had alcohol there, and they were drinking it and drank too much of it. And
this is a Thursday night before a game.
Thursday night before a game, and they really made fools of themselves. And I give them a fearful spray the next day and dropped them from the team. And I thought I might have been a bit harsh with the things that I said to them. But apart from that, there's nothing much else that sort of sticks out. I'm sure there are little things I wish I would have used a better choice of words. You know, I used to speak a lot. I used to address the players after every game and critique everybody. And if you do, you know, you're 20 players or whatever it was in those days, you're going to say something perhaps you wish you didn't say. And yeah, there are probably a few things along the line, but at the end of the day, you can't retrieve the spoken word. And if you say something silly, just apologise and move on. And that's what I always tried to do. I'm sure if I said something stupid, I would apologise and see if I get the player back online again.
Would it be fair to say that the group that we had during that time, 7 consecutive prelims, 93, we beat the Bombers both times in that year, obviously had a few some sore players at the start of that year, which was your first year. Would it be fair to say that you thought the group fell one premiership short, given that they're very hard to win? We know that. We lost a prelim by less than a kick, but 98 was one that I actually thought 98 was our best team, even though we didn't win the premiership.
There's no doubt about that. The best side doesn't win the premiership. The best side on the day does. I think we won 11 games going into the grand final in 98. I think they were all night games, and we get a grand final day of 30 degrees, quite humid. I vividly remember you kicking the ball around the corner and going off the side of your boot. And I think we kicked, might have been 8:27. I think it was 6:15 at half time, and if it had been 15-6. And we were the best side by a country mile, but we weren't the best side on the day. And Adelaide beat us. The following year in 99, I thought Essendon were the best side. They didn't even get to the grand final, and we got in there, and we won it. Yeah, we fell short, I reckon, in 98. And if had it been 3 premierships, I think I would have been supremely satisfied with that. But having felt, in my own opinion, one short, I was a bit disappointed. And I don't think people realise how hard they are to win and how lucky you are when you win one. And luck's all that's left over after you've tried your hardest. And, we had some wonderful seasons, but we also had a bit of bad luck. And everyone has a bit of bad luck. Injuries in 97, so many things went wrong when it shouldn't have. But that's life. You got to cover that and get on with it. And if it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
And do you think that, obviously, I've never told you this in person, I've never told you this face to face, but I have no doubt that if it wasn't for Denis Pagan, irrespective of the team that we had, if it wasn't for you, we don't play finals footy, let alone win premiership. So I've never said that to you personally, so I would like to say thank you, because I really do think that your leadership, the glue, the way you conducted yourself with everyone, and some people say at times it was a dictatorship. I thought that you spoke to everyone in a genuine manner. You spoke to people with respect. You treated everyone with respect, whether it be the captain or the CEO or the boot starter or Judy Francis or whoever it may be. So thank you for that, because I wouldn't be sitting here as a 2-time Premiership player or captain if it wasn't for Denis Pagan. So I want to skip a whole. I want to get off the footy now, because I want to talk about, and I don't want to talk about the incident that's been done to death. It was over 20 years ago. Everyone knows why I left the footy club. How did that affect you mentally at the time, and how does the senior coach, how did you get through it? Once again, I've never heard you speak about it, or you've certainly never told me. How did you get through that? And then how did you get the rest of the team up? Because you obviously had a year to play.
Yeah, it was the greatest tragedy in my time in coaching. Even to the point now, I sort of knew how much pressure you were under. I wish we could have changed it, and you could have come out straight away and just said, "Look, I'm terribly, terribly sorry." I thought you were reluctant to say you were sorry at the start. I don't know how I would have reacted.
I was really quick, and I don't know whether you know this, but I was really quick to just ring Jeff Walsh and Greg Miller, and I rang straight away. So the thought was, I don't know, they sort of say fight or flight, but straight away the thought for me was just, I've got to walk away. Yeah. There was no other thought in my mind. And for those out there that think that North Melbourne, I got sacked or whatever it was, that wasn't the case. I quit straight away, rang them and said I quit. So there was no thought. So the apology thing never really come into mind at that point. It was just like, I've got to separate myself from the club. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I was. One thing about North Melbourne in those days, Greg Miller and Jeff Walsh were just so supportive of the players, supportive of me as coach. If I wanted something done, if I wanted to go and get a player, if I wanted to, fly to Western Australia to have a look at Peter Bell and bring him back, or Jason McCartney, or, wanted to talk, they supported me to the hilt. With that scenario with yourself, a lot of things got blown out of proportion, a lot of things said that weren't true, and just made it messy as anything. I can remember the press conference. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I went out there must have been when it occurred. I can't remember the actual chronology of it at all, but did a press conference, and I reckon there were probably, there were 4 TV stations, but I reckon there were camera crews, 2 or 3 from Channel 9, Channel 7, different shows, and people, the mass of the crowd went back 35, 40 metres. I'd never seen anything like it. Anyway, I thought the whole world had came tumbling down, and it's easy for me to sit in a situation and say, I wish you had done this, and wish you had have grabbed Steve-O and embraced him and said, look, I'm terribly sorry, whatever you want to do, I'll do it. But that's easy for me to say. I'm not involved, and I don't know. I don't want to know the details of it. It was just one of the things, and it's one of the sad facts of life. I suppose you talked about regrets before. I suppose it's one of your biggest regrets. I knew that at the time, and I'm sure even now, if you could have done anything to change that, because it did destroy the fabric of the football club. Okay, we picked the pieces up a bit, and we were okay, but it was never quite the same. When I think how close everybody was and how close you were, it was tragic. It was something that, I still can't believe that happened, and I just wish it hadn't happened, because we had such a bond with everybody, and it was broken. And even now, there's still a bit of angst and that sort of stuff, and I hate to see that. And it was something that I wish could be repaired, but it can't. It's a fact of life, and all you can do now is just pick the pieces up and try and do the best we can with what we've got. I see you, I see Anthony, I see Glenn, and I see, I just wish it had been like the old times. I wish it could have been, you could have gone up to Echuca for the weekend, or gone to Sydney for the weekend and come back and all be mates and trick the coach that you've only had 2 shandies and you didn't have a beer, and we could have all gone on, but it happens. It's life. I'm not going to change it, and these sort of things occur, and it's sort of I'm still, when I think of it now, it still devastates me to think I wish it didn't happen. But look, it's life.
Look, and like I said, we've never spoken about it before.
No, we haven't.
Well, it's obviously the biggest regret of my life. There's no doubt about that. I've made some mistakes. That's certainly the biggest one of it. How much you obviously, was it at the end of that year or the start of the next year you end up going to Carlton?
Well, that was sort of all on the tail end of that. It might have been 2 years later, or certainly the year after. That was huge. My biggest regret going to Carlton. It wasn't anything like what the Kangaroos were like, and the Kangaroos were great to me. They sort of gave me full autonomy to do virtually anything I wanted to do, and we had success. But that was like the downfall of a dynasty, something that had gone on for 10 years, and it just sort of fell apart brick by brick after that. And I just thought that at that stage I'd coached so many of the boys there as 16 and 17-year-olds, and they came into young men at 21, 22 years of age, and I coached them when they're 27, 28 years of age in men, and I've had virtually a lifetime, and I thought, geez, they must be getting sick of me. And I thought, it's probably good that they get a chance to experience other coaches. And I made that decision to go to Carlton. But if I had my time over again, I just would have got out of football and perhaps had a year in the media. And not that I was much chop at that, but do that for a while and then just see what happens. I was disappointed with a few people at North Melbourne, the way they carried themselves at that particular time. But look, we all have regrets, and nothing good's going to last forever. And I think we just move on and just see what happens. A lot of the things that happened are distant memories, especially regarding my departure. And I reckon I've moved on, and I don't even think about it now.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of people, or not a lot of people, a psychologist once said to me that it's very easy to look back and say that if you would make that decision differently, because clearly you would, because you've been able to sit there and think about it many, many years after. But this psychologist in particular said, no, go back to how you were thinking at the time. And you just said what you said, and that was, well, at the time I'd coach players, from the age of 16 to 27, were they sick of me? So those were the thoughts that you were having. So if you were to go back, you would actually make the same decision, whether you know that or not. That's the decision you made, because that's the frame of mind you're in at the time.
Yeah, look, I didn't think it was fair that they had me, and I was demanding all that time. And, you mentioned Glenn before. He was never secure. I wanted them to play with their football in a different psyche and a different frame of mind. And, it unfortunately it never didn't last long after that. And I just wish someone had to come in and they had a little bit more success, so those blokes could have enjoyed it. I wanted you to have some success at Adelaide, and that wasn't to be. And but anyway, that happens in football, that happens in life, and it's just part of the obstacles and potholes you face in the journey for success in life and in football.
No, and we don't all get the fairy tale ending, do we?
No, we certainly don't. It's we had a lot of great times along the way, and there was just so many special moments. But I suppose if you count all the good things, they're going to far outweigh any of the negatives, and anything that happened in the journey. Even what we just spoke about, we had so many good things that can perhaps give us something to sit back and think of.
What about? I made comment on my podcast earlier that Jason, the modern game now, so the players you like watching and all the fanfare around Jason Horne-Francis and how North Melbourne supporters have treated him, or whether that's been the likes of Corns and King that have stirred it all up. What are your thoughts on a 19-year-old that's going through what he's going through at the minute?
Geez, I'm glad Kenny Hinckley's put his arm around him and given him a hug, and I think it's the only thing, and I reckon he's in a good place at the moment with his coach, who's, from what I can gather, a very genuine, caring, interested individual, and I'm sure he'll come through it. There's a lot of people who say silly things at the football. I go to the football and just sit there quietly and never say a boo, but some of the things I hear people yelling out and screaming, it amazes me. But unfortunately, that's the way of the world. There are plenty of big mouths around and plenty of keyboard warriors who like to get on the computer and hide behind the screen and write stupid stuff. But I'm a great believer in sticks and stones may break your bones, but names and taunts will never hurt you. And if someone's, I think of all the things that I've been said to me, it doesn't worry me in the slightest.
You've been around footy for a long time. Just on Horne-Francis, to finish on him, how many 19-year-olds do you know that can be having a poor game? I'm a big believer that one of the things that you learn as you get older, so it's not until maybe 24, 25 sometimes that players can have a poor 3 quarters and then have a really, really big last quarter. I think that's a learned skill, because most players, they just fall into a hole and they sulk or whatever. Their confidence is flat, so they can't pull themselves out of it. We're talking about a 19-year-old on the weekend that had a really poor 3 quarters, but then literally grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck. It was pretty impressive given everything that he's going through.
Well, he's certainly a wonderful talent. And I just think that the club may have been able to handle him a little bit differently. I just wish Alistair had been there when he first came over, and a different sort of coach. And I don't want to be critical of coaches and that sort of stuff, but I just think he was a young man. He needed someone. He needed guidance. He needed someone to support him, and maybe never got that quite as much as he should have. The Kangaroos, or look, he did some silly things. I've heard that he disobeyed, didn't want to come back on the ground one day, didn't want to go to recovery. But I reckon that gets back to the coach. I'd think if someone said to me, "I'm not coming to recovery, I don't want to do an ice bath," what would have I have done, Wayne? I don't know. What would if someone had said to me, "I'm not coming back on the ground"? I bet you they'd be back on the ground.
I reckon they would be, but there was so much uncertainty. But talking about so much uncertainty around North Melbourne at the time as well, with Alistair was going through an investigation, all sorts of stuff. If you're his management, you would have said, "Let's get out of the joint as well."
Yeah.
But in saying that, what would have you done? How would have you gone if a player came and said, "I need 3 weeks off, and I'm just not feeling great at the moment"?
Well, I still remember Ian Fairley. He wanted time off in '96, and we sort of half.
Did you give him half a day or not?
I'd have given him 20 minutes. he came back and played pretty good in the finals. Look, it gets back to the bottle of vinegar and the jar of honey, and know what to dispense when it's required. And it's probably the art of coaching. And look, he's only a kid, Jason. I hope he does well, because he's super talent. And I was disappointed when he wanted to go back home. But I suppose you've got to move on. And the young boy Harry Sheasel, who they've got now, he's probably maybe just as good and is going to be a real talent too.
Well, Dennis, I won't hold you up any further. Thanks again. Like I said, we've never sat down and had an in-depth conversation like that. We've probably never had the time. The times we catch up, we've always got someone around. So thanks for being my first guest on the Truth Hurts, and hopefully next time we have a chat, maybe we'll have a chat about your winners. I saw you had one on the weekend.
Yeah, it's great to have a chat, Wayne. It's interesting. I'd never sort of had the opportunity to sit down one-to-one. I felt it was just me and you in the room, and I was really appreciated how sort of what you gave yourself this morning. It was another feather in your cap, son. All the best, my privilege.
Thanks, Dennis.
The Truth Hurts. The Truth Hurts.